This is The Recap, a weekly reflection on the sermons of Fellowship Baptist Church in Mainville, Ohio, seeking to help you make Jesus essential in every aspect of your life. I'm your host, Ryan Land, and I'm here with the preacher of this week's sermon, Brent Wilson. Brent, welcome back.
Good to be back.
Another week. I feel like I'm getting more and more robotic in the intro. Maybe I need to change it up next week.
Oh, I don't know. Let us know in the comments if you should change up the intro.
I think it's like I'm going to do something out of the ordinary, so I don't feel like I'm just repeating
Yeah, but
it.
see, like, you know, we talk about Albert Mohler's podcast, The Briefing, and it's like he does it the same way for years.
Yeah.
And it's iconic.
I don't know.
Your intro is iconic.
I feel like I'm getting in a rut.
Nah.
Okay.
I like it.
You like? Okay. Well, if Brent likes it, you're the only one that listens. So I'm just kidding. Actually, a lot of people listen. That was disrespectful. All the people that
We appreciate our listeners.
that actually listen and come and tell me how much they enjoy the podcast. So thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Brent.
Ryan.
We're talking about favoritism.
Yes.
Well, your sermon was talking about favoritism.
Yes.
So therefore, we are talking about favoritism.
Yes.
And I was
You're my
trying to
favorite.
think. You're my favorite. I was going to do a wicked ret. So we're favorites together. Anyway, I was trying to decide what favorite thing I was going to add. Because, you know, it's like oftentimes I ask you about a favorite, you know, something to start the show. It's like a little bit of a warm up.
Yeah.
And I was trying to think like when the sermon is about, I can't just ask like favorite whatever. Your favorite. Like, what does that mean? So, but I had this thought today. It's a little bit meta. It's a little bit outside of the form.
Okay.
What's your favorite podcast?
Ooh.
And it can't be The Recap.
It can't be I don't listen to a lot of podcasts.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm not a big podcaster.
I feel you strike, is it because you listen to audiobooks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me pull my podcast.
You strike me as like a big podcast guy. I don't know why. You give off big podcast energy.
I did just listen to this education.
I listen to a lot of podcasts.
I do like the Bulletin.
Look, I'm putting you on blast a little bit. When's the last time you listened to the Bulletin?
Probably a month ago. I didn't say it was my favorite. That's how
sorry. I was thinking of The Recap.
You mean
not
the Briefing? You mean the Briefing?
Yeah, I mean the Briefing.
The Briefing I listened to actually more recently.
Oh, really?
Because I listened to it after the inauguration.
Oh, you're like, what did Dr. Mueller have to say about the inauguration? Yeah. Okay. I do like the Briefing. Christianity. That's a Christianity Today.
The Russell Moore Show.
Also Christianity Today.
I like that one. I do like his Thinking in Public.
I like interviews. Yeah.
I mean, I've only listened to season 1, but the You're Not Crazy.
Oh, it's so good.
Podcast.
Yep.
I do listen to the Happy Half Hour, which is a Carolina Panthers podcast. And there's another one with Jake Delhomme and whatever the left tackle from back in the day his name was. Oh man, I used to listen to this one called Jabba the Pod. It's a Star Wars podcast.
That's where you get the hot take a lot.
Yeah. Cultivated was a good one.
Man, I did love Cultivated. Mike Cosper, if you're listening, bring back Cultivated.
Bring it back.
He's not listening.
Yeah, those are probably the big ones.
That's good. It's a good list.
A couple political podcasts on here, but I won't say those just to tip my hand.
Yeah. You don't want people.
I don't want people to know my political flavors.
Yeah. I listen to a lot of those that you just the Bulletin. I listen to
all Pastors Talk on 9 Marks.
Yeah. There's a new one TGC puts out called The Everyday Pastor that I listen to that I really like.
Oh, Jacob Even was telling us about that.
I think that's The Ordinary Pastor.
Oh gosh, this is The Everyday Pastor.
Yeah, this one's Ligon Duncan and Matt
Oh
Smothers.
Yeah, that's different.
But I also listen to Trevin Wax. Does a podcast called Reconstructing Faith. That's really good.
Okay.
I listen to
Rayner on Leadership.
Knowing Faith.
Yeah.
Tom Rayner.
That's a good one.
Is it Tom or is his son?
It's both of them, actually.
Whoa.
To get
double
their
Rayner.
podcast.
Yeah. Knowing Faith from Village Church with
I've never
Jen
listened
Wilkin.
to it, but
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Dude,
my wife loves it.
It's so good.
I have it on here. But
Yeah. I also listen to this narrative podcast called American Scandal, and it's like every season they do like 6-episode seasons, and it's like a retelling of like some dramatic thing that happened in America.
I did listen to one.
Really
I don't remember what it's called, but one like crime podcast. I feel like you probably listened to it. It was about like this guy is like
in like Mississippi or whatever.
Yeah,
like
it was like a
Arkansas.
murder.
It's called S-Town.
Yeah. That was awesome.
I love podcasts like that, but the true crime situation is just like there's just so many of them, and so I've got to be really interested.
Yeah.
To go in. So yeah, S-Town's pretty good. It is for adults though. So
Yeah.
I mean, because it's a true crime podcast, but yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah. I will say I'm much more on the audiobook train.
Yeah, no, I love a podcast.
I love an audiobook.
I don't love an audiobook, but that's maybe we'll talk about audiobooks.
I do love a lecture. And sometimes lectures come in the form of podcasts, like the one that you listen to and that I listen to.
Yeah. That you talked about in your sermon. You didn't reference that.
Yeah,
used
I
an
did
illustration.
I did take the illustration from said lecture.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to the sermon.
Okay.
Talked about favoritism, and I loved how you framed this topic as being anti-gospel, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So kind of like let people in on like why such a strong framing against favoritism. Why anti-gospel feels like a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So where did that come from? Like, why did you think it was important to frame it that way?
Well,
or in the text, so just walk through that before we go through the 6.
Yeah. When I started thinking about the sermon and just thinking about the idea of favoritism, it's like, why is James bringing this up? And, when in the introduction of the sermon, I kind of compare it to sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So we think if we're not a good sharer, not that kind of big of a deal. I think maybe favoritism, we kind of think in the same light, right? It's like, well, you shouldn't have favorites, but not that big a deal.
Mm-hmm.
But the way James begins to argue for it, all of the issues are directly attacking or directly antithetical to the gospel, either what the gospel is or what the gospel produces. And so it's just a particular sin that is really just the opposite of what the gospel is and produces. So
yeah, I think it's so helpful. And I think just particularly because you hear sermons about negative stuff, right? And you just think, yeah, favoritism bad, don't do it. Move on. But there's no real motivation in that. And so I think it's framing something as it's actually just antithetical to what we believe to be true. I think is a little better motivation to not do something, right? And you talk about fruit, we talk about all this stuff, how the gospel produces, fruit and the fruit of the Spirit or whatever. And that to say, like, this thing is not just, hey, something we shouldn't do, but it's antithetical to what we believe, right? And so it's like our applied theology does not match our understood theology. And so I think that's a really strong way to think about it and to frame it. And so we'll get into like more specifically why that is. And so I didn't want to broach that subject until we talked about. Yeah. But just I thought it was interesting to like why to frame it that way. And so I think it was really great. So you give these really 5 reasons, and then one kind of really it was a positive thing at the end.
Yeah.
Like what does the gospel do? And so let's talk about these kind of points. First, you say favoritism is anti-gospel because it follows worldly values. And so I know you went through these in your sermon, but talk a little bit more about like what do you mean by worldly values and why is that antithetical to the gospel?
Yeah, well, the world, why do we treat, so in this illustration, right, the rich man comes in, or the guy with the nice clothes, gold ring, and you got him compared to the guy in shabby clothes, and the natural inclination of us is to dote on that guy, give him the place of honor and respect, treat him well, and the other guys get to standing room only or sit. And it made me think of, and I didn't use this illustration, but it made me think of The Greatest Showman. There's this scene where, toward the end of the movie, the guy creates the circus and he's got all the freaks.
P.T. Barnum.
He's got all the
Hugh
freaks.
Jackman.
Yeah, and but then he's discovered the nightingale, and the
opera singer.
Yeah.
Okay, I actually didn't remember that.
Oh yeah. So the girl who sings so beautifully. So he's just met her, and now he's going to introduce her on stage. She goes on, and he's like kind of without hearing her, kind of committed to, hey, come to her, let's go show the world, because he's heard about her reputation. She sings, it's amazing, standing ovation,
Never enough.
Well, then he goes into like this like pre-party for his show with all the circus freaks, and he's in there talking to everybody, and like he has made it. His in-laws come in and like who have rejected him, and he gets to rub it in their face that he's arrived. Like, look, he's made something of himself. He's on the inside now. Well, then he goes to the door to this room where this party, they're all eating caviar or whatever, and all the freaks are wanting to come in, and he's like, "No, you can't come in here. The show's going to start. Go over here." And even during,
they think this is me.
Yeah, and even before that, he's asked by the number 2 guy,
Zac Efron.
Hey, they're here. They want when the Nightingale's going to sing. Hey, where should I put them? And he puts them in the standing room only, where no one will see them. So it made me think about that. It's like our natural indication, like inclination, is take the people who are nice, put together, good personality, whatever. And let's make much of them, and the other people and really, I think the value is they're going to not do anything for me, or they're going to bring me down with them. And so I want to surround myself naturally with people who are powerful, people of influence, people who are like me, and the opposite of those other people.
What it makes me think of when Samuel goes to anoint the son of Jesse that is to be king. And it's like the oldest one comes, the biggest one comes, and he's like, not you, not you, not you. Yeah. And like so much so that Jesse's like, well, there's one more, but we didn't even think it was worth it to bring him. Yeah. He's so little, he's so young, whatever.
Yeah. Ruddy.
Yeah. And so they go get him, and Samuel's like, this is the guy.
Yeah.
And he says, I can't remember the verse verbatim.
It's like God judges by the heart.
Yeah. Man looks on the outside, but God looks to the heart. And so I think that is kind of echoed here in James. It's that, we look to the value of someone on the outside, their rings, their wealth, their whatever, and then make a judgment on how are we going to serve this person, how are we going to show this person, elevate this person, honor this person. And then it's a little bit like, what are we going to do with this other person?
Yeah, and I think it's such a strong temptation in the church. I even read this, and this was super convicting. It's like, how do we build our buildings? We build them with wealthy people in mind. We want people to come in and be comfortable and have nice things. And it's like, wealthy people not going to come to a church that's falling apart and ragged. They're used to comfort and luxury, and right. And so it's like we build our churches.
We don't want to sit on uncomfortable chairs or pews or whatever. And so we gotta get comfy chairs.
Yeah, gotta have the nicest stuff.
Yeah.
And so, but even what I was saying was before that is like, it's so easy. It's when you have those two different people walk in the church. Well, one of them is really going to help our church out. We get that guy in. We get him to come to our church when he's going to start tithing a lot. But the poor guy that comes in,
he's going to be a drain.
He's going to be a drain, right? Like, we're going to help him. And so it's this natural inclination of, well, this guy's going to help me, so I'm going to give him more attention.
Yeah.
That's the worldly value.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some of those other, like, outside of James gives the rich-poor distinction, and I think obviously that's one that still exists. What are some other, like, categories you can think of that the church tends to, like, show favoritism towards, whether directly or like indirectly, subconsciously?
Yeah. I think political lines. I think just personality. Like, there are people who have difficult personalities, whether they are, it's because they're like obnoxious or because they're shy, or just because they're awkward. Right. And so we're like, hey, we're around, but we jive with the people that are hip and like they can tell jokes and they're fun to be around, right? Or whatever. It's like, so we kind of make a distinction there. I think like just every possible line like creates cliques, right? It's like they're like me, they look like me, they sound like me, whether it's racial lines, political lines, interest lines.
Let me throw one at you and tell me what you think.
Okay.
Because I've heard people say this before.
Okay.
At our church, and so, what about like kids versus adults? So I've heard someone say before, it's like, I just think it's so distracting when there's kids in there crying or running around.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, this room is for the people who can sit and be quiet and listen.
Oh, interesting.
Like,
yeah.
What do you think?
I think they're wrong.
Yeah, no, of course.
Yeah,
But it's like, I think
yeah,
maybe it's something we're not even aware of, right? Is
Yeah.
that we're like, well, this room is for the people that can, and I think church, like bigger churches especially do this
Yeah.
when they have like kids worship services and youth worship services. And it's like, but the main event, you know, the main worship service, that's for the people that can pay attention and
certainly.
And so I think like a lot of ways, like I think people with disabilities, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
like there can be, it's like, we're going to put them over here to the side. We don't want them to be a distraction to people. We don't want too many people to see them. Right. And it's like, so you think about like, one thing I thought about during your sermon was like pictures I've been looking at church websites recently. It's like pictures on church websites, like who you choose to put on the website.
Yeah.
I think is a clear tell on who you might be showing
Targeting.
showing favorites
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
Yeah, and so just like I think so like this can be something that we do so subconsciously.
Yeah.
Even in just what we value, right? That we like go down these worldly categories. So anything else you can think of on that sort of a categorical standpoint? How we can guard against it, how we can become aware of it, maybe if we don't even realize that we are.
Well, I think just starting the
doing
conversation, helps us to begin to be aware of it and to think about it and begin to see it. And every church that has been accused of having cliques denies it. It's like, no, we don't. These are just my buddies or what. You come on in, right? But it's like they don't actually do a good job of bringing people into the inner circle. And so I think it is definitely a sin though that is easily be blind to. So you gotta be very actively hard working against it and fighting it and thinking about it. So
I think that's helpful. Like that it is such a thing that could be so subconscious that you have to be like aware. You have to make yourself aware.
Oh yeah,
of
like
it.
I'll say like there have been people who have thought about me, like, oh, that I don't like them or that I'm mad at them or I don't want to talk to them because, I'm on a Sunday morning in particular, I'm running around like crazy. And I may walk past someone and not say something to them, not because I'm intentionally trying to ignore them, but just like I'm on a mission to get somewhere. And so I think that can come across to people, even if we don't intend it sometimes. And so we got to be even better about including everyone.
Yeah. For sure. Goes back to our core value, right? Everyone's valuable.
Yeah.
That's kind of a little bit where this comes from.
Yeah.
Right. And not just that everyone has value that they brings, but that everyone's worthy of value, no matter, no matter what about them.
Innate value. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next point was favoritism's anti-gospel because it doesn't care for the poor. So that's like a very specific example from the text.
Yeah.
And so why is that? Why not just put that in the worldly category? Why draw this out so distinctly?
Well, because it is particularly in the text. And I think, caring for the poor has been something at the heart of the church since its founding. And when we think about why is it anti-gospel, right? Because the gospel, God became poor. He humbled himself. He did not have a place to lay his head, right? He didn't have any money.
Oh no, I think it's a great.
And so
like Jesus didn't have a job.
right.
And he worked on donations.
Yeah, and he's going around and he's particularly often caring for the poor, those who are sick and the lame and
feeding people,
lepers, feeding the and so when we see God becoming poor and then serving the poor, caring for the poor, I think it's really just at the heart of who we should be. But then also because the poor don't have the same obstacle for the gospel that the rich do. Right? You think about the story of the
rich young ruler,
who seemingly believes the things, seemingly is a good person, keeps the commands, but ultimately doesn't follow Jesus and goes away. And Jesus is harder for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to come to faith. And so they have this obstacle of, I'm self-sufficient, man, I've got everything. If I want something, I go buy it. I get it. I acquire it. I'm in control. And to come to the gospel, you've got to relinquish control. You got to relinquish ability. You got to relinquish that you are contributing, and you have to be poor in spirit. And so at the heart of the gospel is the recognition that I bring nothing to the table. While rich people are like, no, I'm always bringing something to the table. Look at me. I've got it all.
Yeah.
And so it's at the heart of the gospel, because being poor in spirit is necessary. And so therefore, poor people often come to the gospel easier because they know they're in need. They know they need help. They're desperate for something to change their life around. And so I think that's why it's at the heart of the gospel.
Yeah. And this is like such a Christian distinctive, like, of caring for the poor. And we don't think of it this way because we're like surrounded by, in America, we're like surrounded by so many like charities and people who are, the government and whoever's like taking care of poor people. But I think none of that existed. Like, I'm thinking back, I just read this book about how the church engaged with the culture in like the first 3 centuries. And one of the things it talked about was how no one cared to take care of poor people.
Yeah.
No one cared to take care of orphans. No one cared to, give out food, or people liked to give out jobs, right? They didn't, like, and that it was a Christian distinct. People actually made fun of Christians and actually used this as like a apologetic against Christianity, because they were like, look who they go to.
The undesirables.
Like, they go to the poor people, the dumb people that they can trick and all this stuff, right? And so it's such a clear Christian distinctive, and we live in such an age that's been so influenced by Christianity that we just think sympathy or care for the poor is like kind of like a societal given.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's like not true. It's like distinctly related to Christian teaching like this.
Which came up for me recently when I was thinking about the word vulgar. And so the word vulgar came
Vulgate.
up. And I was
explaining,
I was explaining to my kids what vulgar meant. And I was like, Kate, do you think vulgar in the Latin Vulgate, which was one of the early English translations of the Bible, or is it Latin? It was translated from English from Latin is what it was.
It's not English. It's
it in Latin?
Hebrew to Latin.
Hebrew to Latin.
Right? I don't
think.
know.
It's an early translation. And so I was like, okay, it's how are those words related? So I look up vulgate or vulgar, and it means common. And so it was translated. I think that's why it's in English, because it was translated to the common language of the people. And so just the idea that vulgar means, it's those people.
No, it's Latin.
Okay, which I guess when it was translated,
the Latin
was the
version
common.
of the Bible prepared by Saint Jerome.
So at that time, everybody spoke Latin. And so that was the common language of the people. And so vulgar being, all those other people, right? Those lower class people, they're vulgar.
The sorry people.
The common people.
That's what the sorry people.
The sorry people.
That's a reference to a video. Yeah, and so I think that's so important. I'm going to I just thought of this. I'm going to throw a curveball at you. Why is James, by explicitly calling out the poor and saying, take care of the poor, why is that not showing favoritism to the poor?
Interesting.
I just thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, he's not saying care for the poor. Well, really, it's not in this text. It's not a call to care for the poor in any particular way.
Earlier, when he says true religion is this, to care for orphan and widows, why is that not showing favoritism to the orphan and the widow?
Yeah. I think it's because the rich guy has food on his plate.
Yeah, to each according to his need.
Yeah. The poor people don't, and so we're actually evening the scales. It is a thing that we as conservatives don't like. It's equity. Yeah.
To each according to his need, right? It's like the rich person with the rings and the robe doesn't need anyone to buy him food.
Yeah.
The orphan
but if he
does.
did, James would say,
let's get it. Yeah, for sure. It just came out that could be a playing devil's advocate to James. It's like, well, you're showing favoritism.
But I never advocate for the devil. So
me neither. Then you talk about, you relate this to James relates this, and you did too, to the taming of the tongue. And you say that favoritism is anti-gospel because it doesn't control the tongue. Yeah. So tie that in for us.
And really, that's like an outworking of like when you show favoritism, it's going to be seen in how you speak to people. And, people in our circle, people we like, we talk well about, we encourage, we build them up, we high five them.
Let me just say, the thing you said about like service workers it was like I wanted to stand up and applaud as someone who has been like spoken down to many times from like customer service work.
Yeah.
For stuff I didn't even do.
Oh yeah.
Like I was like I wanted to stand up and applaud.
And I just think it really destroys your witness when you, particularly if people know you're a Christian and you're like chewing out this waiter because they messed up or the kitchen messed up, right? Like it's just like, man, show some patience and some grace. Patience and grace has been shown to you.
Yeah. Those who have been forgiven much should forgive much.
Yeah.
Right.
And the problem is you don't think you've been forgiven that much. Now, I'm gonna say this, and hopefully it don't make people mad, but I think there have been like some studies about this, that boomers particularly are often more quick to like get onto like customer service type workers, and millennials and Gen Z are, and I don't know about Gen X, but millennials are much more gracious, and I think there's some reason why, and I can't remember what the analysis was.
I don't know. A lot of times I think, like for me, it's like the reason I'm so, like I try to be so patient is because I've done that job, you know? And so I don't know if maybe like boomers didn't really like, they just went straight into a career.
I feel like it was just this idea of like, yeah, it's like, hey, that's your job. You're supposed to do it. Do it well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like, I don't know, but that is true.
Not all boomers.
That is, yeah. But that is true that, and in relation to the text is that we've created a class, but it's not rich or poor, but it's like anyone who does this job, it's like, it's an easy job. This is a job for dumb people. This is what we think on like a subconscious level. For simple people. Like, I don't know what you want to say, but it's like, so if you can't even get this right, like, and so we feel this, I don't know, like ownership. One of the verses that really stuck out to me from James is when he talks about the poor person coming in, and he's, the rich person, hey, come sit up here. And the poor person, he says, come sit at my feet. Right? It's like, hey, come show everyone that you're subservient to me. Right. And I think when we like when we feel the need to like dress people down or chew them out or whatever for getting something wrong, that we're saying, hey, come sit at my feet. Come show everyone in here that you're subservient to me. And so I think that's real. I think it's a great application of the text.
It makes me think of the first Sonic movie when Jim Carrey comes to the major general or whoever is like, come to show up a bench. He goes, hey, who's in charge? He goes, well, I'm in charge. Nope.
Wrong.
Who's in charge? Me. Wrong. And he's like, well, he wants everyone to know. Y'all called me and I'm in charge.
Yeah. No, for sure. And that's what when we do stuff like that in public, that's what we're doing, right? We're just trying to show everyone like, look how strong I am. You're the one who screwed up.
Which is also a worldly value, right? It's like survival of the fittest, hierarchy. Like I'm the powerful, eat the small.
Yeah. So I think that's so, and I think we are in more ways than we think, like kind of power obsessed. Like whoever has the power in a situation is a real motivator for us. I think on a subconscious level, and so I think that's really evident in our speech and how we talk to one another. What are some other ways that you think we can sometimes show favoritism in our speech, particularly?
Yeah, it could also be the lack of speech, right? Like I'm talking to these people, and then I just ignore those people over there. I'm quick with them. I'm short with them, snappy toward them, and then encouraging and building up and lavishing praise on the other people. So yeah,
I almost struggle to bring this up, but I'm going to ask you about it. What about preferred pronouns?
Oh, Ryan. Well, ask a particular question.
So I have preferred English pronouns.
Sound the hot take alarm.
You have preferred English pronouns.
I do.
Yeah. Would you like me to call you she and her?
Well, ask your question.
You would prefer me to call you he. So you have pronouns. There's a group of people whose preferred pronouns do not match their biological sex.
Yeah.
Is it favoritism to one group of people to give them their preference and not to give another group their preference?
Well, so based on the logic of the way you've asked the question, I think I'm going to say I don't actually have a preferred pronoun. I have an accurate pronoun. I'm not preferring you to call me anything. That's what I am. And so,
but
it's not that one
the
group
other
gets
person
preferred.
would say the same thing.
Well, they're wrong. Oh,
I'm just, but
yeah, no, that's what they would say. That's what they say. I'd say they're wrong. And so I don't have a preferred pronoun. I have a correct pronoun.
No, you do have a preferred pronoun. If people walked around and called you she, her, you would not like that.
Yeah. It's just, but it's wrong. It's inaccurate.
That's true, but you also prefer the other one.
I think, I get the argument, but I think I would say that if they're making that argument to me, I'm gonna say, well, it's not a preference. It's objective. Mm-hmm. We were talking about objectivity earlier today, mm-hmm. and I would say one is objective and one is subjective, and so
the preference versus
a preference is what I want, and the other one is just factual.
It's like my preference and the fact match.
Yeah, well, I guess.
Yeah.
But if the question is how should a Christian?
Yeah, can this text help us navigate that question at all?
Certainly. I mean, I think later in my point about loving your neighbor, mm-hmm. I think maybe this is maybe relevant in that.
Don't go ahead.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
I think that's certainly relevant. I even mentioned this group in that point. Mm-hmm. We should certainly love them, care for them, treat them the way we want to be treated. I think the pronoun thing is complicated. Me personally, I would not call them their preferred pronoun. I would avoid the pronoun and use their name. So, buddy, whatever. I would try to use more general language, because I think one of the ways to love them is to not capitulate to something that I think is sin, wrong, unhelpful, harmful for them. And so to give into that, I think, is actually not loving them. And so to love them is to be kind, but not to give into what I think is a delusion. Yeah. So how do you show kindness and truth? It's truth and love. Mm-hmm. And so I think you got to find that balance of, hey, it's the same thing like somebody, hey, do I go to my gay friend's wedding? It's like, how do I show you I love you and care for you, but I'm also not approving of this.
Yeah, the speech thing came up. The pronoun thing just is related to speech.
Yeah.
And so I was just curious about.
Yeah. And so we shouldn't be like mean to them with our speech. We shouldn't tear them down. You're crazy, right? It's like, but you're a waiter, and this person, or you have a friend, you're a coworker, and this person says, "Hey, this man says my pronouns are she, her." Oh, okay. Let's say my relationship's very shallow at this point. Cool, gotcha. At that point, I'm just going to call them by their name. That I'm not offending them. I'm not hurting their feelings. I'm not creating this firestorm every time I say he. Right? But I'm
not trying to be right.
Yeah, but I'm also not going to capitulate and give into your delusion. So I'm gonna try to avoid the whole thing.
Yeah, I think it's fair. Any other ways you can think of after I bring the spicy hot take?
Here's the can of worms
that you can think of with speech, particularly that we can tend to show favoritism.
I mean, maybe and this is also bleed into the love of neighbor thing, but I think one of the reasons why we have such a worldly this is going to bleed several of these issues.
That's all right. I'll allow it.
Worldly values and not
Listeners,
loving our neighbors is the way our political discourse has shaped us more than the Bible has shaped us. Our political discourse is to throw bombs to the other side of the aisle and to praise and to even cover up a multitude of sins on my side of the aisle. And so we do that to our, whatever side you're left or right or whatever. Well, it's just like Nazi, Hitler, fascist, it's like the most extreme words that we just throw to the other side, evil, whatever, and cover up my side. And we got no issues over here. We're good over here. It's like probably showing a little bit of favoritism of I'm blind to the issues on this side and everything's terrible on that side.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think that's super accurate. And I think also just like the tendency to be negative, right? Towards there are people where our first instincts are to be negative towards them.
Yeah.
And there are other people who our first instinct is to be positive towards them.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's favoritism. That's clear favoritism, right?
Yeah.
And so, pushing
Bias.
past your gut, your own bias, right? And pushing past that and trying to think critically about an issue or whatever, right? That will help you not, show favor to one side or the other. Not to say you can't be, totally to one side, but to just be fair that, when you're on that side, you're not, being unfair, showing favoritism, letting people giving a pass to bad things.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not, what I'm saying is what we're not advocating for is just being in the middle. It's like, you're wrong on the right, you're wrong on the left. It's okay to say like, hey, I'm fully on the right and I disagree with all these things on the left.
Absolutely, sure.
But give fair credence to people that disagree with you, right? And be intellectually honest.
I'm of the Tim Keller school that's like, let's make the best argument for the other side.
Oh, yeah.
Don't argue against the straw
actually,
man, the weak argument.
Argue against the steel man. That's a great way to, I think, to avoid showing favoritism in your discourse or in your speech, is to not argue against the worst possible version of what someone might be saying, but to argue against the best possible version of what they might be saying.
But I also think that like, because we have this favoritism and bias, it leads us to not be able to think critically and to not see. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, the left came at Chick-fil-A, right? And, Chick-fil-A, because they've brought politics into their workplace, we ought to defund Chick-fil-A, regulate Chick-fil-A, hurt Chick-fil-A with whatever, right?
I don't know that anyone wanted to regulate Chick-fil-A. I think they just were encouraging people to boycott. But don't go.
But there were people calling for like tax stuff, like just let's hurt them.
Don't let them in the airport.
All that kind of stuff. And our argument against that was they're a private company. They can believe whatever they want to and sell chicken wherever they want to. Well, then fast forward to a couple years ago, Disney all of a sudden is bringing their politics into the workplace and are talking about, whatever gay stuff or LGBTQ stuff and affirming that. And then the right wants to come in and regulate, take away tax incentive, and the right celebrating that. It's like, hang on, guys. It's actually pretty much the same thing the leftists want to do Chick-fil-A that you were against over here, but now you're for it. And so I think it's just kind of blind because it's on your side. You don't see that it's kind of the same thing. Ryan wants to argue with me.
Sure. I'll say sure for the sake of time. I understand the point you're trying to make. I think it's a lot more complicated than that, specifically when it comes to making art versus making a chicken sandwich. But I think there's variance in there.
Sure.
But we got to move on. So fourth, favoritism is anti-gospel because it sees with human eyes, not spiritual eyes. And I think this goes back to the worldly values thing. And so rather than going back to sort of those same topics, how do we train ourselves to look at people as God sees them rather than looking at them as our relying on our own intuition or whatever to judge them or see them?
Yeah. Well, one, I think, is being in the scripture, right? Like the first thing that came to my mind when thinking about this point was all of the people throughout the Bible that God used that are unexpected, right? Like he's using all of these misfits and failures and screw ups and people with, you mentioned David, right? He's the smallest and the youngest. Talk about Joseph, this bratty kid, Moses, guy with a speech impediment, Paul, a guy who was not a good public speaker apparently, and hated Gentiles.
I would say that was probably the best thing on all those guys' agenda, or on all those guys' resumes. Like that was like the top of it.
Yeah, and so, but God uses all these people and more. The racist prophet Jonah, and so it's like
that's probably the bottom of his resume.
Yeah.
That's probably, racism is probably the worst it gets for Jonah.
And so, just being in the scriptures, being reminded of, these are the types of people God is using. God rarely ever uses the powerful, the people in positions of influence and money and things. He's using the normal, everyday, messed up, broken people. And so that's who God's using. And so one, I think just being in the scriptures reminds us of that. But then two, it's like you just got to be asking yourselves the question, hey, am I, when we talk about speech as this x-ray, spiritual x-ray to my heart, well, what am I saying about those people? What do I think about those people? How, and that's going to reveal, but it's going to reveal, oh, maybe I'm treating them differently. And so, but you got to be cognizant of it. You got to be thinking about it. You got to be looking for it.
I think it's helpful to think like, what's your expectation of a person versus what's God's expectation of a person? And it's like, I think a lot of times, specifically Christians, we can have the expectation that everyone acts like we think they should act. And actually, God's expectation is that we're all actually going to mess up really bad.
Yeah.
And so to have one, I think it fills you with grace, right? That it's like God has seen all my mess ups and sins and wrongness and evilness, and so it's easy for me to look to someone who has done something wrong or evil or has hurt me and think I can have grace with them. But also I think. There's this story that there's a priest he lived in Louisville, and he tells a story about how he's standing on the corner of 4th and Walnut, I think is what it is, in Louisville, and he says, he's just like, God, let me see them as you do, is what he prays. And he says, and I opened my eyes, and if but for a moment, every person that walked by me had a face shining like the sun, and I realized that I loved them, no matter our differences. And so there's this idea that's like, that because we're made in the image of God, the radiance of God's glory of every individual person, believer, not believer, whatever group they're in, should be so beautiful to us that we can't help but be turned to love and to care and to grace and to mercy, because that's what God was turned to. He created man, and when man fell, he immediately, the first thing that comes from his mouth is a judgment and then a promise of redemption. Yeah. And so I think it's just helpful to see that, God's promises are for those people, that God's love is extended to those people. And so to see them as God sees them is to elevate them to the level that God elevates them.
And often I think if we go back to the source of like, what is causing us to look down on or whatever these people, right? It's often our politics or our family background, or something that has caused us to not treat certain people with value, dignity, and worth, whether we grew up in a racist family or our politics tell us that this group of people is bad. And so just kind of going back and analyzing ourselves and questioning ourselves. The problem is we always just want to be right. And so it's like, put away rightness and evaluate, because we're all wrong on places. We got to figure that out.
Yeah, it is a lot. I mean, I've said this already, but the story of the prostitute coming and washing Jesus' feet and saying, Jesus saying, those who have been forgiven much, forgive much. Yep. And so that when you understand how messed up you are and how good God is, that it's easier then to love people better, to serve people better, to not create all these distinctions in your mind. Yeah. Because you realize God has not created a distinction for all the stuff you've done to him. Right. Last sort of negative, and then kind of get into what the gospel creates, is favoritism is anti-gospel because it causes us to sin by failing to love our neighbor. Now, obviously, everything we've kind of been saying relates to loving your neighbor, but James specifically quotes, this is the second time now, he's specifically quoted the Sermon on the Mount. And so that's the Sermon on the Mount, right? No. I mean, Leviticus, yes, but then doesn't Jesus say...
Not in the Sermon on the Mount.
I can't remember.
I don't think so. So it's at the parable of the Good Samaritan.
It's in it multiple times. But it may not be
up there. I can't remember.
I'm thinking of the
I just preached through it.
I'm thinking of the golden rule is what I'm thinking of.
Oh, that's definitely the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, and that's not love your enemies. But it is in the Good Samaritan. Yeah. And you mentioned that. And so tell us a little bit how that story teaches us how to not show favoritism, and then also this idea of loving your neighbor as it relates to favoritism.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you are showing favoritism, you are not loving the group that you are that are not your favorites, right? You're not living them as your neighbor.
Yeah.
And you know, for Jesus to put a Samaritan in as the hero of that story is just like, you know, sticking the knife in and trying to open their eyes. And it was just fascinating for me to sit here and think about, if Jesus was telling me that story, who would he put as the hero? Who's the person I'm going to go?
Yeah, it's so helpful.
Oh man, I can't believe that guy is the one. And so I think it's just a great question to ask, and
To be honest with yourself about.
yeah. And I think being honest with ourselves is probably pretty hard. But maybe ask the question: who is the worst person that, if they were there, you know, that it would make you mad or whatever? Who's the worst person you can imagine being in that position to be the hero? And so I think that just kind of opens our eyes to, oh, here's this group of people that we're not loving as our neighbor.
And the whole reason Jesus is telling the story is because this guy is trying to
He's trying to get his way out. Yeah,
wriggle out of the.
He's a lawyer trying to lawyer out.
Yeah, and so he's like, but who is my neighbor?
Yeah,
and so Jesus is like, hey, let me tell you who your
and he
neighbor
actually
is.
doesn't answer the question.
Yeah,
the
he just tells a story.
Yeah, the guy says, "Who's my neighbor?" And Jesus tells a story about being neighborly, and makes the guy that he wouldn't be a neighbor to as the hero. And so,
and ends the story with, "Go and do likewise."
Right.
It's not something it's not like, I mean, there is a theological implication to the story, but Jesus is using it as a point of application.
Yeah.
Right. He's saying the worst person you imagine is your neighbor. The person furthest away from you is your neighbor. So go and do likewise. Go and treat them likewise.
Everyone's your neighbor.
Yeah.
And so go treat them the way you want to be treated.
Especially the person you think's not.
Yeah.
Like whoever your gut says when we say everyone's your neighbor, and your gut is like, but not this person, that's your neighbor.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
I've seen this kind of in the wake of some of the stuff going on politically now. This Christians have been talking about this thing like the sin of empathy. Have you seen this?
No.
They like talk about how Christians are being too like, don't be too empathetic. Like you need to hate what God hates.
I mean, that's true that you need to hate what God hates, but that doesn't mean don't be empathetic.
Yeah. Well, and the problem is, how can you trust yourself in practice? You know, like
You gotta be very careful.
To hate what God hates in such a way that you're not hateful to a person.
Yeah.
You know, and so people have been talking about, it's like, don't be too empathetic to, you know, this group or that group.
Yeah.
And then you preach this sermon, I'm like, favoritism. It's like, we show empathy to these people, not these people. So I think that's just like so wrongheaded.
Yeah.
In pursuit of honoring to God's character and God's commands. Yeah. But I think it's wrongheaded because it's denying kind of the truth of this, of loving the person who is furthest away from you.
Yeah, because like you can think about, let's take I don't know, like a drug dealer, right? It's like, we could hate the effects of the drug dealing, how it's destroyed people's lives, and hate that this guy's doing drugs, and yet and have empathy to understand the background and the life and the circumstances that led this man to go be a drug dealer.
Well, like Jesus certainly hates prostitution,
but he loves eating with them.
But he never once hated a prostitute.
Yeah, and
so I think that's helpful to think about.
Yeah,
he's hanging out with them a lot.
Yeah,
and so and didn't do him any favors. People didn't really like it. So then you moved from there to, and we're dancing around this, talking about how Jesus surrounded himself, but to this idea of that it produces like favoritism, anti-gospel, because what the gospel produces is not a club, but a family. What did you mean by that? What's the distinction between club and family?
Club, clique, subgroup.
There's ins.
There's a circle, right? And
this summer it was Kendrick Lamar. They not like us.
I'm not cool enough.
That's a song. It's a song. But he said there's us and then there's them. They not like
you're
us.
In, you're out. These are my people. And so Oh, I was like, where were we at? I was like, the Lamar thing threw me off.
Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you off with Kendrick.
No, yeah. So the gospel doesn't create these small little cliques. It creates a new family, a new kingdom. And so we're all in that believe in Jesus, right? The only in and out are those who are in Christ and not in Christ. But if you're in Christ, all of these other dividing lines Ephesians 2 have been torn down, and none of these things divide us anymore. We're a new family. And so I use this illustration about, this is what I got from that lecture we're talking about on the podcast, is all of the stories of old, whether it's Shakespeare, the Greeks, when they told what are called comedies, these stories that all end in weddings, it's two different cultures, two different people, two different kind of worlds. And when they come together, it creates a new world, a new culture, a new people. But in modern tellings of stories, and I'm not going to say all the time, but a lot of the time, you have these two different worlds, and one of them has to capitulate to the other, right? I almost used Twilight. Like, it's like when Edward...
She has to become a
vampire.
Yeah.
Right? And in that option, the reason I use it, it's like there's no third way. They can't become like werewolves together or whatever.
No, there are werewolves.
No, but Edward can't become one.
Yeah, that's true.
And so...
But they do have like a half something. I can't remember, actually.
It's like, you get into some mythology.
I was trying to explain, like, I think their baby's like half human, half vampire, but so she like ages, but I can't remember. It's been a long time since I read the book.
Yeah, but it's like she has to become that.
Yeah.
So one of them has to capitulate to the other one. In the lecture, I can't remember the movie, but there's like a British guy and a American.
It's What a Girl Wants, starring Amanda Bynes and Colin Firth.
And so like the British person has to become like American or whatever.
Yeah.
Capitulates to that culture.
Yeah.
Instead of becoming new. And the gospel doesn't take all these Republicans and Democrats and makes us Republicans or whatever. The gospel takes people from all these different walks of life, all these different backgrounds, all these different thoughts, and it makes us into one new thing that's still messy. Every race, tribe, tongue, nation, all these different roads are still kind of present, and we're all kind of being conformed into this new thing, but it's a new thing. It's not the thing that we came as.
Yeah.
It's something different.
It's the fundamental misunderstanding of the Galatians, right? That they're like, no, you have to be Jewish.
Oh, yeah.
Like you have to do the Jewish customs, right? It's like, but Paul is saying no, we're not Jews. Like we're not Jewish anymore.
We became a new thing.
Yeah. And so Ray Ortlund talks about it. It's like the gospel doesn't just create a new community. It creates a new kind of community.
Yeah.
Right. It's something totally unique to itself.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important. And like you're saying, the dividing lines disappear inside this new kind of community.
Yeah.
Poor, rich, poor, race, politics. And so I think I really liked the imagery you talked about of the roads, right? It's like we're all on these different roads, and they lead to one road that we walk together.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a great picture of the gospel, is that you look across the world and everyone's living their own, individual life. But for those who are in Christ, all of that is going to converge into one road, one kingdom. Where we'll all be together. I think that's one of the beauties of the gospel that we rarely think about.
The great convergence.
That's pretty cool.
The final frontier.
I think someone used that. It made me think of the Andrew Peterson song, "Many Roads."
Oh, many roads we took to
get
get here. If you've not listened,
was
to
for
Andrew
you
Peterson,
to hear this story,
go listen.
and for me to sing this song.
Gosh.
He's
my favorite.
Ooh, bring it around town, run it all the way back. Any final words on favoritism?
Don't do it.
I should have asked you who your favorite kid was, but to start the podcast.
Oh gosh, good thing they don't listen. Clara.
Ooh,
I'm just kidding.
I was about to say, like, she deprives you of the most sleep.
That's true. That's true.
I thought she'd be near the bottom.
No, all my kids been waking up lately, coming in like,
them.
Daddy, I can't sleep. What do you want me to do about it? Go back in the bed and lay down until you fall asleep. Like, it would choke you out. Like, what do you want me to do about it? Okay, now I know. That drives me crazy. It's like, if you're going to come to me, bring me a problem that I can give you a solution. Don't bring me a problem I can do nothing about. Like, sometimes they'll come in, Daddy, I got this, like, cut on my arm. Okay, cool. Is it bleeding? No, go to bed. Like, what is happening here? I can't sleep. Me either, because you woke me up. Lay in your bed, read a book, count sheep. I don't know. Ryan has lost it.
The image of like your sweet kids coming to your bed, Daddy. I can't sleep, and you going, what am I supposed to do about it?
Sorry.
That's so funny, Brent. Okay. Ooh, thanks for joining us for the recap. We hope this conversation has encouraged you to I can't make it through it. Keep striving to make Jesus essential in every aspect of your life. If you aren't part of our church family, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning. We gather for worship at 10:30 a.m. every week. For more information, you can go to myfellowship.church. Thanks for listening.
Be blessed.
Don't make fun of me.